Welcome to week 6, Whole Life Challenge. It's hip help time. Hip help time. We're going to go through exercises that check in with the full range of motion of your hip and do a little rollout for all your glutes. For our check-in, I just want you to walk. Take a walk around your space and try not to let your furniture or anything inhibit you, but really get a sense of how it is you're walking. Pedal around, feel the movement of your hips, your feet, your knees, the whole Megillah. All right, our rollout is using a pair of either the Yoga Tune-Up balls or the Therapy Ball Plus. If you don't have these, you can use a pair of tennis balls. But I like using 2 because they tackle more surface area. This is called the ball plow for put your rear in gear. What you'll do is you'll place the therapy balls just on the outside of the glute max, on the outside of your hip, the largesse of your hip, and then let the therapy balls dock in, and the therapy balls are actually going to move the glute as a whole up towards your sacrum. That's the bone in between your 2 pelvic bones. I've got my other hand on top here to add more pressure, and of course the balls are going to roll because they're balls, and balls will roll, but the idea is you really want the buttocks to kind of get cinched together like you're putting on a pair of jeans so tight that they give you a little bit of a butt lift. So it should take you about 30 to 45 seconds to complete one move. That's how slowly you're moving. We talked about muscle bracing in week 1. And unbeknownst to us, our glutes are often in states of constant partial contraction. You have a lot of glutes. You have the glute max. I just reset, by the way. You have the glute max, the medius, and the minimus. And you have the deep 6. You have 6 very deep and small rotators of the hip. And they are like the rotator cuff of your hip joint and hip capsule. And sometimes one or the other are just always on. Those of you who've got piriformis syndrome or have infrequent sciatic pain or frequent sciatic pain, sometimes it's some of those smaller muscles extra tight pressing against that nerve that makes things so annoying. So this is a way to actually trick those tissues into compliance. All right, so put your rear in gear, other side, got the therapy balls docked in and letting them plunk in. Now, if you feel when you bring the therapy balls, it's extremely uncomfortable, you can always do this up against the wall, or you can try doing the contract and relax technique, which also will help to create more tissue compliance and will help the myofascial tissues to not be so uppity, so to speak. So I've got my other hand here pushing against the top bund to bring my buns closer together, put my rear in gear. Deep breathing. This is extremely relaxing, especially if you can let your tissues relax. And this ultimately will help us to gain mobility at the coxal joint, which is your hip socket, your hip joint. The hip joint is comprised of the femoral head and the acetabulum, and it moves in about 6 different ways. In addition, it has a circular action called circumduction, which we're going to experiment with right now. Okay, so come on out of that. And then come up to standing. Now this is a move that I learned years ago when I was a dancer. I'm still a dancer, but not professionally. This is called hip circles, or the circumducted hip. What I want you to do is to keep your skull, ribcage, and pelvis as aligned as possible, and then lift your right hip up, or bring your right thigh up, and then stabilize yourself by holding onto a wall, or if you can stabilize within your own body, do so. And what you want to do is trace the actual hip socket in slow motion, trying to find as much full range of motion as you can. And I'm being extremely conservative, and now I'm going to go a little bit more intense without allowing the spine to move at all. And then you can reverse it. I'm only going to go in one direction here. And so now I'm doing my left hip, first just staying conservative, trying to trace the entirety of the hip socket. If you ever studied ballet, this is called the rond de jambe, although I'm not doing the rond de jambe properly, because that would involve pointing my toe and other things. But I'm just trying to use my own femoral head to trace that somewhat circular shape of the acetabulum and drawing that most circular-like movement without having any translation to the rest of the body. So just as another quick example, this is what we're trying to do. And depending on your range of motion, if you don't have a very large range of motion, there's a certain point of hip mobility where the rest of the spine will actually translate to get the motion. And I don't want you to do that. I want you to have as much stability in your torso as possible while the hip does its thing. And all of us are going to be limited to one degree or another. Okay, next, we're going to do some static stretching at the wall. So you'll need a yoga block, or you can even use, oh hey, look, you can use your role model book for this. This is convenient. But I mean, you need some thick books, so maybe have 3 copies of the role model book handy. That was very good placement. Thank you, book. You'll lay on your back, and you'll place anywhere from a 2 to 4 inch block underneath your sacrum. And this is called knee to chest at the wall. In the yoga space, this would be called apanasana at the wall. My left foot anchored into the wall, and I'm lifting this up because I want you to see my abdomen. Hold on to the right shin. Now, if you can't hold on, if your hip flexion is very limited, you can always use a strap at the shin or behind the hamstrings. And this is a double loop stretch strap. You can use a cloth or a towel as well, or a belt. You're going to make sure that the toes of the left foot are pointing up, and this creates a wonderful stretch along the hip flexors, and it also talks to the joint capsule. The longer you're here, you're able to get a really good sense of extension into that hip. Take abdominal thoracic breaths that we learned during week 1, and at the end of exhalation, guess what? Revisit your diaphragm vacuum. That is, you spread the ribs and allow the stretch of the diaphragm and psoas to feel their end range of motion here. Then you let go. Again, you breathe abdomen and rib cage. Exhale completely. At the end of exhale, broaden the ribs and feel that deep cavitation, that internal suction. In low back love in week 4, we talked about that relationship, the respiratory diaphragm and the psoas. And so here is an exercise, a mobility exercise, a sustained stretch exercise where you can really feel that relationship concretely, the slipperiness of that fascial relationship between them. And go ahead and switch sides. Left knee towards the chest. So also, I'm not trying to force the relationship. So I only go to the range where my hip flexion ends. I'm not changing the relationship of my spine or trying to flex my spine. So it's a check of honesty, this relationship of hip extension on the right, hip flexion on the left, and then you trying to be as true in your spinal alignment as possible. And obviously the ground is giving me support here as well. So you breathe in, belly to rib cage. Exhale through the nose. And at the end of exhale, you spread the ribs. You find that deep suction inside. So you stay for about 75 seconds to a minute and a half on each side with the psoas, diaphragm, deep hip flexor stretch. And of course, you may be feeling stretch all the way through the quadriceps, the rectus femoris, that big quadriceps tendon. The bonus here is that you're being a student of your breath, you're being a student of your body, you're embodying your body, and you're feeling those interconnections between your hips and your breath mechanic. And then the extra bonus is that you're a little bit upside down here. Your head is lower than your heart, lower than your pelvis, which means you're in an inverted position, which means you are entering into a very wonderful state of downregulation and upregulating my favorite nerve, the vagus nerve. Once you've settled back down after the block has gone away, you roll yourself to your side, you come up to standing, and you want to recheck your walking. So take a walk. Hopefully you're feeling a little bit more giraffe-like, a little bit more on top of your center of gravity. There's more extension as you walk and even more activation of your glutes. That's hip help. I'll see you next week, players.